Hi, everyone. I'm Cameron. I am the co-organizer of the New York City Accessibility Meetup. And I'm here today with all of you in the AKQA office. I want to say thank you to AKQA for hosting tonight. And a big thank you to ArcTouch and Ben Ogilvy over here, who ArcTouch works as a digital development agency working on mobile and web services. So if you're interested in an accessibility forward development shop and design shop, talk to Ben over here. And I also want to start by thanking our volunteers tonight, Song, who most of you met downstairs, and a couple of, I think I have my volume on here. Couple of logistical items. There's a bathroom, accessible bathroom through the hallway here. There's water. There's a water spout right over here, and some glasses on top. And let's see. All of our events are live streamed and recorded on YouTube. We have a live captioner remote. So thank you to Kimberly Shea on the live captioning side. Jolly McPhee over here in the back is doing our live streaming. Thank you to Jolly and the Internet Society's New York Accessibility Special Interest Group for their services here. And speaking of the stream, Meryl Evans is hosting the digital stream and fielding questions on YouTube. So thank you, Meryl, and everyone who's joining today. Hello, everyone. Finally, we want to thank our sponsors. Equal Entry is an accessibility consultancy founded by our speaker today, Thomas Logan. Thomas is also my co-founder of the meetup and co-organizer, so there's that too. Events is a automated accessibility testing solution to help identify accessibility issues in mobile and web content. Fable is an accessibility platform powered by people with disabilities. And Asana, where I work, where some of you have been before, usually hosts, and we are a work management platform that helps companies work well together. Now, on the note about Thomas for 20 years has helped organizations create technology solutions to help people with disabilities. He's the co-founder of the Meetup, and he's the owner of Equal Entry, consultancy whose mission is to contribute to a more accessible world. And if you're interested in talking with Thomas about his consulting business, by all means, check in with him after the event. So with that, I'd like to welcome Thomas to the stage. Thank you, everyone.
A11yNYC. A11yNYC, which stands for Accessibility New York City, because there's 11 letters between A and Y.
It's a numeronym.
It's a numeronym. FYI.
Okay.
Looks like it's working. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, I guess to start off, I'm very excited to be back in New York City. I'm actually moving back to New York City. I was living in Japan for 4 years, and then I traveled around the world, and I've decided New York City is the best place to live in the world. So for those of us in the room, we can all agree with that. Maybe online, you may disagree, but I've decided this is the best place to be, and I'm happy to be back. We also want to just kind of acknowledge our meetup started over 9 years ago, and so Cameron and then Sean Laureate and myself founded this, and this is also Shion Horn, who's amazing. But the three of us founded the meetup over 9 years ago, and Sean just took a job in Seattle in Washington. He's going to be in a really great position at Microsoft to be influencing accessibility. So, we thank him so much for the years of working with us together, and we're really excited for what he'll be doing out there at Microsoft. I'm sure he'll be doing a lot. So thanks to Sean, and yeah. Let's go right into this presentation. I have a lot to present tonight because my typical style is just to give a lot of different short ideas, and I hope that you find it stimulating. I'd love to have the questions and have a discussion about the topics we're talking about. Obviously, when you talk about the legal space, there's a lot of different things happening in the United States, specifically in the legal space. And then we're also going to talk about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.2, which came out at the end of 2023. So what's going on in the world of accessibility? Well, in my opinion, lots of lawsuits in the USA. So in the US, it's according to UsableNet, but there was over 3,000 lawsuits federally in the US last year, and then there was 1,500 in state courts. And so basically, this is a huge number when you think about influencing accessibility. I think it's very important to understand how the legal system in the US influences accessibility and how the technical standards such as WCAG 2.2 relate to that. So my goal today is to show you, from my perspective, why it's really important to care about the technical standards, because it does relate into our legal system. And in America, a lot of times, even though we all know here that accessibility is the right thing to do and people should do it, the legal system in the US is actually what can influence a lot of change. So I'd say that that's still continuing, and there's pluses and minuses, right, of the lawsuits in the US. And also just to point out, the real reality in the legal system is that, for better or worse, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are the way that our court system has been understanding if something is quote unquote accessible or not. And so when you think about, there's lots of other ideas about how we make content accessible. We want to test with people with disabilities. We want to do design testing. But when it comes down to actually arguing this in a legal framework, the technical standards of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are what people use to understand what they need to do. And so this is just a quick timeline of the first version of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines were in 1999. Maybe some of you all weren't even born yet. But WCAG 2.0 came out in 2008, and then 2.1 came out in 2018. 2.2, which is where we're at right now, came out in 2023. So there's, in some way, an acceleration. I mean, it's almost like 10 years between the other versions. It is a minor version, but it's just important to understand that these guidelines are really what informs what people have to do in technology, and a lot of the other ideas as far as having a great user experience, making sure your product's delightful and lovely. Those are all things that, of course, we believe in, but they're not actually what's getting legislated. And so this is part of what's interesting for myself. I'm doing a new podcast, we'll put that in quotes, but we're working, Ken Nakata and I have worked together. This is me much younger ago and Ken Nakata much younger ago. We've been doing this discussion around how do technology and the legal system work together in the US. And so I've known him for at least 15 years working in accessibility. He came from the Department of Justice, and he worked on the Section 508 guidelines that are the federal guidelines for procurement for accessibility, and we are just looking at lots of different cases and trying to talk through the actual details of, for most of us probably here in the room, it's like, I don't want to read legal brief, I don't want to, it's like these are 40-page documents, 50-page documents, but when you actually dig into them, it is really the nuts and bolts of how progress is being made in the US. So this is why I think this topic is really interesting to discuss with you all tonight, is that we kind of have to understand the progress we can make in technology also in the legal framework, because a lot of times the only way to get certain companies to make progress is through our legal framework. So let's just start off with my first example that I want to talk about from a real case study. This is from Wired.com's website, and the headline is a good clickbait title. This company tapped AI for its website and landed in court. So this is really going into the topic around overlays, and we've had a presentation at our meetup in the past about overlays. Specifically, there was a case where that became, I guess, fairly a good example. There's many other cases, though, where people are using accessibility overlays on their website. And for those of you all that aren't familiar with this technology, the idea is that these overlay companies will tell a company that's being sued, all you need to do is install this one line of JavaScript, put it on your website, magically all your accessibility issues are going to go away. And this is showing, this is like a very clear example. So if you're struggling with that in your organization, or if people want to go to that solution, this particular case is a great example where they did actually use an overlay, and then they got sued again because it didn't actually solve the problem of accessibility. So the company is called iBobs. How many people here wear glasses or need glasses? Okay, a lot of people forgot them. But you think, okay, when we think about what's important for accessibility, well, a company that works on improving vision, I mean, people with low vision, people who are blind, they're going to be going to this company that's selling glasses. So I think it's a really good example of a case, because you don't have a lot of arguments of why should this company care about accessibility. Well, a lot of their customers are people who have some degree of low vision. And so basically the company was iBobs, and they made their website first accessible just via using an overlay. They actually used Accessibility, which is one of many different overlay providers. And what happened in the case was they brought the case saying, even though you have that overlay on your site, I still can't use your site. I still can't purchase glasses, and I can't find out the products that you have on the site. And so in its own statement, iBobs said it's no longer working with Accessibility, nor will we in the future. So it's pretty definitive as far as they thought, they listened to the salesperson from Accessibility, they put it on their site, then they had the lawsuit. Now they're like, we'll no longer be working with them. And so I think it's a really good one to be aware of if you're working in an organization that might be considering using this technology. There's other cases, but this one is definitely, if you really dig into the details, there's a great expert witness report from Carl Groves, where he wrote really in detail about they applied this technology onto their site. It didn't actually work. It didn't actually make the site better for people with disabilities. And just to close the loop here, when you go to the iBobs website, this is their site now, you see no overlay on the site. So just to further echo that they publicly stated they're not using an overlay, and when you actually go to the site now in 2024, they're not using that technology. Oops. The next case I want to talk about, which actually made it to the Supreme Court, woohoo, but this was about hotel room accessibility. So for example, I'm sure you all can think of a time you went to a hotel and had a negative experience. Maybe something isn't like how it was described on the Airbnb or in the reviews. This case is really about, well, if you're a person with a disability who needs to have an accessible room, being able to figure out if the hotel really does have an accessible room is really important. Like, you don't want to show up at 11 o'clock at night in some other city, go to the check-in and then have them tell you, oh, I'm sorry, like, we don't have an accessible room for you. And so this case is really interesting. Unfortunately, it's like not actually decided, but it was Atchison Hotels LLC versus Laufer. Deborah Laufer was a woman who was blind, who was actually going into, actually I'm not sure if she was blind, scratch that, but it's a person with a disability researching the accessibility of hotel rooms. And this case became, I guess the big discussion is, can someone file a lawsuit against a hotel that they're not actually planning on staying at? So really the crux of this issue is, should we allow people with disabilities to test sites and actually improve access for people if they're not actually planning to go to that site? And this has to do a lot with the legal understanding of the idea of an injury happening to someone, and that would have been the crux of this case was, did the person who was testing the site actually experience an injury because she wasn't planning to stay at that hotel? Her work was to make sure that in the future, if she wanted to stay at that hotel, it was accessible. So obviously I kind of land on the side of like, I think this is good if you think this through. I mean, how else are we going to have companies improve access to their sites? But what ended up happening when it went to the Supreme Court, for whatever reason, this case, it was dismissed. She withdrew the case, so there is no verdict or ruling on this item. And I guess that's something important also to understand about our legal system. Once there is a ruling, it does become more of a precedent. We have to act from it. So I guess for this particular issue, there is still no ruling. But I think it's interesting, and there's some other laws around the US where it's actually incentivizing people with disabilities to report accessibility issues in technology. And generally, I'm going to be on the side of like, I think this is a good thing, because why should you have to wait to actually show up at the hotel at 11 p.m. at night and then be like, oh, you don't have an accessible room, without people testing it and assessing it and improving it? More likely you're going to show up and have that horrible customer experience. So, but no decision on that one, but interesting case. Another case I want to talk about is around education. And this was interesting for me. I didn't know anything about the Office of Civil Rights, and this is a specific part of our government here in the United States where people can bring complaints in the education system. So it can be high school, middle school, elementary school, college, but it's a searchable index of all the different complaints that have happened in education. So you can actually go to this website, the Office for Civil Rights Recent Resolution Search, and you can do all kinds of filters. You can look, we could actually change our state here to be New York. So if we wanted to find out like cases that were happening in New York, we can filter this site. And what happens is all the different universities, and most of them are universities that I've seen on here, but they've received letters from this government office saying, hey, your site's not accessible. We've had a complaint either from a student or from someone that attends the university. And then it's generally like a similar agreement they're sending to everyone, where it's like, you have this many days to work on your site. After 6 months, this should be working, this should be working, this should be working. So in the blog post that I worked on with Ken, we kind of looked at an example of the resolution agreement. And we picked University of South Florida. No hate on University of South Florida. Anyone a graduate of University of South Florida? No. Well, but it's like really there's tons of universities that have had these issues, but they look similar. And for example, they'll tell you, you need to adopt an accessibility standard within 30 days of this agreement. You need to report in 30 days that you've done this, and then the OCR is going to review it. You need to put a fully accessible notice on the university website describing how people with disabilities can inform the university of any technology-based barriers. There's a lot of things in here. And purposefully for my blog post, we tried to pick a university that had received one of these letters, and then 6 months later, what does their website look like? Because the letter said in 6 months, you need to be totally accessible. And spoiler, it wasn't great. It was not, even though they agreed to this, the chancellor or like the head person of the university has to sign this agreement and commit to it. But who's actually going back in and then checking, are you following up? Are you actually doing what you said you could do? And so my recommendation from this particular exploration was, even if you're not going to like dig through the whole university website, how about the home page, the first page of their Twitter, the first page of their YouTube? Literally, if you see problems on those first pages, clearly they're not putting accessibility into their processes. So this is just one of my points, is at least have some process to check. I understand there's a cost to check the entire site, but if you go back and you see just on your homepage you haven't addressed what was originally in the complaint, you're not actually complying with the letter. And I guess I thought this was an interesting one where not many people do dig into these details. But when you dig into the details, it's like that's what they agreed to. 6 months later, it should be better. And I just have some screenshots, but again, not calling out South Florida specifically, but I guess I am calling out South Florida specifically. They have on their homepage, it's just the homepage, this is using Accessibility Insights tool where you can number the keyboard stops on the web page. So basically you can see that when you load up the web page, it starts up at the top of the page, it jumps down to the banner, then it jumps over to this far right side, it jumps down, jumps over here, it skips a bunch of elements up at the top of the page. So it's really not following a logical focus. And again, for me, it's like, I get that you might have missed something on, some subpage, but this is your home page. This was literally in the complaint that the items were out of order, and it's still there 6 months later. And it took me like 1 minute to identify that. Oh yeah, actually, yeah, one's like not even on it. Right, yeah, sure.
Is accessibility
Oh yeah, we should, yeah.
This is the Drew Barrymore show? Hi, thank you for answering my question. Or trying to, at least. Okay. Is Accessibility Insights, is that a tool on the browser, or is that, what kind of tool is that? I'm not familiar with it.
It's available in the browser and as a desktop application. It's made by Microsoft, so
Okay.
It's supported by Microsoft. And specifically for the browser, the visualization of the keyboard flow is a feature of Accessibility Insights that I would say is unique to that tool and worth using it for. The rules that they're checking the website with are very similar to DQ's Axe and Google's Lighthouse. So the rules, as far as like the code, are all the same. They all come from DQ, actually, the Axe tool. But the visualization is something unique to Accessibility Insights, and you can run it on desktop or browser.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Here was another example. This again is just going, I guess we call it X now. Got to get used to that still. But the alt text, which is very hard to see, but it's just image for this beautiful picture of like a Labrador wearing a logo of the university. So it's like just the canonical example again where you didn't do any work on making your social media accessible if when you put the image up, the alt text is image. So again, I don't have to spend any time evaluating this, discussing this. It's like, no, all it says is image, so it's not a good alternative. So again, this is like the most recent tweet that I could find on their page. So I didn't have to dig through lots of tweets to find the example. And then the next one was the YouTube. So this is also the most recent YouTube video. And basically, we're looking for the closed captioned logo. We're looking to see if they've actually supported closed captions. And similarly, most of the videos that were on their site had no closed captions. So again, it's like these are just the default things that we need to have alt text for images. We need to have captions for videos. You can't rely on auto-generated captions as your solution, because auto-generated, as we know here at our meetup, that's why we have human captioners, it's not going to be accurate to the level that it should be. So again, disappointing that didn't have to dig through the YouTube. It's just the first YouTube video. It just shows they don't have a process in place to make it accessible. All right, my next topic, who likes to buy things on sale at the grocery store? Oh, right. Yeah, it's kind of like the default thing of like, maybe if you find out that something's on sale, you're going to buy that. And so this case is actually the like first case that I worked on to get into the legal side of accessibility, and I'm like proud of the work. It has positives and negatives, but we worked with to allege this company, Winn-Dixie, which is a grocery store chain. One of the barriers on the site was that you wouldn't actually find out what was on sale or what the coupons were, and they have a process of every week they release a advertisement saying, you know, this is what's on sale this week. So if the website's not accessible, the only alternative would be like walking into the grocery store and having someone read to you like, well, what's on sale this week? And again, can you imagine like listening to someone working at the store? Number one, they probably aren't going to want to read every single item that's on sale. And we want to enable people the same way that visually we can just go on the website and see things are on sale. This case for me was like, that was like the biggest issue for me in working on the case was, why can't you find out the same information from the website? Like, why would you have to go in and talk to someone to find out what's on sale? And basically the problem, this is like from, I think 2015, so going back a long ways, but these were all images of text, and that was the problem here, was that if you have an image of text, if you're a person who's blind or using a screen reader, you're not going to get any of the information as far as like the specifics of the deal. And this case, you know, had a storied history, but it was the first case, or one of the first cases, to put the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines into a requirement for a private business to make things accessible. And I think one of the things that's cool about the outcome is that now if you go to, I have a Winn-Dixie page here, and this is the current advertisement for what's on sale this week. So now, you know, if I pull up VoiceOver
on Chrome, link, main, pharmacy, week, zoom out, zoom in, search, boneless center cut pork chops, save up to $6.49 per LB, buy one get one free equal or lesser value, select for details, button.
So, you know, now it's like actually reading out the individual information about the things that are on sale. You tab through the circular, you can get all of the information in there. And I put that out there as like, you know, something that I think is a great example of, okay, we did have to have litigation, but now the site's improved. And without that litigation, would Winn-Dixie have like put the thought into complying with this requirement? I don't know. So I think that's one where I can show it and be like, oh, that's good. Like there was a lawsuit, and then the company changed its behavior, and or the company they're working with changed their behavior.
VoiceOver off.
The next example of a case I want to talk about, and this is just to show the broad aspect of, you know, technology now is pervasive in almost everything we do in the world. This is about actually going into LabCorp or Quest diagnostics if you're going to get your blood drawn or getting, you know, maybe for your annual physical. There's a whole kiosk system now deployed in these environments, which are all over the United States, where you need to log in and show that you've shown up, and then there's a process for like getting entered into a queue to have your blood drawn. And so that was all done on an iPad. So it's a mobile, basically, device, but it's also like a kiosk. And the idea was that there was no way for someone with a disability to interact with the kiosk and show that they had entered into the space. And there's not always someone standing there to help you, because lots of companies have now loved to move to technology solves everything. We don't need people working in the jobs. And so this was a loop, or like a problem or a barrier that, no, if I can't find out where that iPad is and I can't register that I'm here to have my blood drawn, how do I get serviced? And so I'll just show you this example just to make this come through. I'm going to mute the audio, but it's just to show that it's basically an iPad housed inside of a, a protective framework, but it's like, welcome, touch the screen to check in. And there's a lot of items to actually like scan your reservation. And there's a lot of interactions to actually complete the check-in. And as they're discussing what this process is, you have the option to say, I would like to wait outside in my car. I'd like to wait in the office area. You have options that are available from the device. The lawsuit ended up getting resolved with having to have a 3-finger swipe for a person with a disability. Basically, if you can get up to the kiosk and do a 3-finger swipe, that will put you in the first in line as the next person to get your blood drawn or whatever's happening at the place. And you'll just sort of be registered automatically that way. And I guess the critique I have of that is like, what about being able to choose, did I want to wait outside? Did I want to wait inside? Like the other features of this application are kind of ignored by that solution, but that's what they agreed to. That's what the settlement was. And I just wanted to put in here too that we're doing a lot of conversations now on social media about the topics we're doing. And one of the comments that I got was from Nina Gerling. She was talking about, well, like, what about someone who doesn't have 3 fingers, and like thinking further down the line. And it really does show you that this was probably made in somewhat of a hasty decision of the solution. It's what they agreed to. When you settle something, that is what it is. But as we think about this in a larger, broader discussion, like what is the way to do an accessible kiosk? And should 3-finger swipe become a convention that every kiosk uses? And if it does become a convention, like how do we design that into like the McDonald's experience or the airport experience? And I think that's really important to think about in these cases, is that you don't really want it to be, oh, I need to do 3-finger swipe at Quest and 4-finger swipe at McDonald's and 2, it eventually needs to be designed in a way that's clear and actionable. But this is just a plug to say, every article I'm talking about, we do put out on social media, and love to get your comments too. All right, last one is just to show mobile accessibility. Who would like to not have to carry their driver's license around and just have a digital driver's license? All right, yeah, me too. I don't think we can do that in New York yet, but in Oklahoma, they have a feature where they've digitized the license, and they're basically saying you don't have to have a physical hard copy license with you. You can use this app, and it's just the same as having a license. And so again, this was going into, all right, well, that's great, but how does someone who is blind or low vision use the app to register their own license? And so this is just on the screen showing that there's kind of a complex visualization of like scanning your whole face to make sure it maps your whole face, and then somehow they tie that back into your driver's license data. But this was a perfect example of, if you tested with one blind person, it's silent when you pull it up. So there's just no information to complete the task. Wouldn't have been hard for this company that built this app to figure out that it doesn't work. They could have tested with one blind person and been like, there's no announcement. And in my mind, again, too, it's like, I think it's very describable to tell someone, turn your head to the left, right, up, down. So this was another lawsuit just showing that like mobile applications, kiosk applications, website applications, they all have litigation happening in the US. And it's important, it doesn't matter, what platform you're working on, there are cases happening, broadly. And this was also like, this is another meta point that I keep making in the podcast, but a lot of times the company that makes this software is working in more than one place. It's, being used by multiple states. So even though they got sued in Oklahoma, this company is making similar software for other states. So it just goes back more to like, why would Oklahoma work around or create something unique for Oklahoma? The company that makes this product should consider people with disabilities, have it in their default solution. Every state they sell to should buy it, and they should only buy it if it is accessible, and they shouldn't buy it if it's not accessible. All right, and my last transition to WCAG 2.2, we're coming back to New York City. I want to give a plug, and I think we should acknowledge the representatives that are working for us in our local community. Senator John Mannion, Senator Cordell Clear, and Senator Leo Webb. These three Congress people in New York are responsible for creating a new law in New York State to require better accessibility for state government websites. So I've put their Twitter handles. I'll also have a tweet on my Twitter, but I think we should thank them and also support them for the work that they're doing to improve accessibility. The Senate bill was S3114A. Our government loves to have not fun names, but this requires state agencies to conform any of their websites to the most current version of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines adopted by the World Wide Web Consortium. So I thought this was very interesting from a legal side, because a lot of times in the past, a new version of WCAG came out, but it would be, when do we have to meet that, or what do we have to do? This is actually saying, like, from day one, WCAG 2.2 is released, you have to meet it if you're working with this state government. And a couple other state governments have similar legislation, but we have that here now in New York. And that's my transition to WCAG 2.2. So if you have to do it, if you're selling to a state agency or you're working with a state agency, you're going to need to meet the new requirements. So big picture, there's 9 new success criterion in WCAG 2.2. Success criterion are meant to be independent, testable criteria that you can say a piece of technology either meets it or does not meet it. So there's 9 new ones, but in reality, the way that it works in, again, the legal world, you never have to meet the AAA criterion. They're sort of the extra credit or bonus. So there's really 6 that you have to meet the way that it's defined legally. And the last point for WCAG 2.2, if anyone's a WCAG geek, 4.1.1 parsing was removed. So there's actually one guideline that got removed, and the observation was that it just wasn't really being specifically addressing the needs of people with disabilities. It was more of a, lots of noise for things you have to fix, but what's the end user benefit? So I agree with that as well. Like, if we want people to fix accessibility issues, make sure that they are big barriers. So the first one we'll look at here is the 2.4.11, focus not obscured. And hopefully this demo will work. Even though I gave Wired a plug, now I'm going to make Wired look bad. So the idea of focus not obscured is the thinking through someone that's not using the mouse to navigate the page. They're using the keyboard or maybe a switch control to tab through items on the screen. And I think that this test should mostly be done at the 400% zoom setting, because we also already have a guideline for people who are low vision that they're going to be working on the site at a zoomed in ratio. So on the site here, we can see now that as I tab through the page, we already are violating this requirement that I'm hitting tab and something's getting focused behind this email address pop-up. And so this criterion was kind of created because there are a lot of sticky footer items or header items that are getting created on websites today. And this one actually says that if, actually this is not going as good of a demo as I want. But let's say that, okay. Technically, this complies as a AA because you can partially see what has focus. So this is the AA requirement is as long as something shows up in focus, it complies. AAA requirement is it has to be fully visible. So to be AAA, I would have needed to see the entire focus rectangle. But to be AA, as long as part of it is visible, it's compliant. And then to fail AA, it has to be like completely obscured and not visible. So that's that one. And then I had to put in I wanted to do a call back to why accessibility overlays are bad. So this is just a random design agency. Maybe someone here works for them, MoBurst. Sorry, it might not be random. But I just picked the site, very busy, and they're using accessibility overlay on the site. Wheelchair icon, pretty big in your face. You start tabbing through the site. As soon as you start tabbing into the site, the overlay pops up on the screen. And now as you keep tabbing, the overlay is actually blocking the visibility of, like, there are certain items that are hidden by the overlay. So it's just this further point of, like, these companies are saying we're building something to make the web more accessible, but actually having this on your site is creating a WCAG 2.2 violation. It's like totally obscuring the content behind it. So work on that. I think the most common errors: cookie disclosure, sticky footers, notifications, and then I'm putting accessibility overlays in quotes. And I do think it's more common doing 200% or 400% zoom. Probably don't see that as much, by default, but still we should be testing that as well without doing the zoom. And we mentioned the AAA. All right, dragging movements, which is AA. So this, here we are at 72 Spring Street. On Google Maps, right, like you can drag and drop and like move around the viewport. So if we're all here at 72 Spring Street, what's around us? With the touchpad, I'm dragging and creating an operation of like moving the viewport and exploring what's around. This requirement is saying that you need to be able to do everything with a single mouse pointer. So on Google Maps, you can zoom with a single mouse pointer by like clicking on the plus icon or clicking on the minus icon. But you actually don't have a way to navigate up, down, left, and right with a single mouse click. You can do it with the keyboard, which is like up arrow, down arrow, left arrow, right arrow. But this new WCAG requirement is saying it's not about working with the keyboard. You have to also have an available online visual icon to control it with a single mouse click. So in this particular item, again, maybe you can dig into this one more, but I don't think you have the equivalent way to navigate the Google map. And a simple example of a solution, this is something I built on the Equal Entry website, but you can have buttons, right? It's not gorgeous, but you can have buttons that are the equivalent of scanning the viewport, that are physical buttons that people can click and interact with. And so that's really the idea, is that anyone can do this, well, not anyone, but the single mouse click does not require the dexterity of like having a drag target and a drop target. You can actually just single click each of these items and control the interface. And so that's the idea for that new requirement. And lastly, this Trello solution I think is an interesting one. So in Trello, it's a project management tool where you can move tasks between, right now on the screen I'm showing a to-do list, a doing list, and a done list. And a traditional drag and drop UI would be, I'm working on developing the website, so I'm doing that. So I would drag and drop the task from to-do into doing. Well, that requires a dragging movement. So what Trello has, which is good, is you can single click on the edit icon, single click on move, and then you have a drop down to move it to the other list. So all of this can be done with a single mouse click. So this is an example of how you basically achieve the same solution just using a single mouse click. And so I guess for this one, it's just test with a mouse and index finger on the web desktop, and then test with only a single finger on a mobile device. So it's actually something that, from a practical point of view, it's just the same way of people used to say like unplug a mouse. It's like you probably just need to work with your mobile site just with the single tap and try to do that operation. All right, target size is the next one. This is AA. This is an interesting one, that 24 pixel by 24 pixel is actually quite small, but that is the AA requirement, which basically says everything that you have on your website needs to be at least 24 pixel by 24 pixel to be clicked on. But it's also about if things overlap. So you can actually have something very tiny if it doesn't overlap something else. So it's, in my mind, it's not a very strict requirement. I think it's pretty hard to fail this, although it's possible to do it. In this particular example down at the bottom of the screen, there's a little bit of overlap of 24 pixel by 24 pixel where you can see that you might accidentally click on the left button or the right button because they're so close together. I give this example from SoundCloud, which is funny, they've actually updated this since I even made this video. But in this video, there's a X icon, which is pretty hard to see here, but there's a close button. And it's actually, I'm using the code inspector to see that it's only 15 pixels by 15 pixels. So technically it fails, it's too small to be clicked on. But the reason why it doesn't fail is there's nothing else you can click on around it. So this requirement's really, you have to have something right next to the small thing to fail this requirement. So it's, like I said, it's kind of hard to fail it. And I've made a little plugin which we'll share after this presentation. Oops. But it was based off of work from Jared Smith, who's also presented at our site. So you click this button and you can have a 24 by 24 cursor. This will let you actually hover over your site and imagine with this red icon visually, that's the size of 24 pixels by 24 pixels. So if you drag this over something and see that it's overlapping or you can't fully click on the item, that would be a violation. And the one that Jared made was 44 by 44. This is what I was hoping would be AA requirement, because 44 by 44 is more of the human standard of touch targets. But that's now a AAA requirement, so we won't be able to actually fail something that has items less than 44 by 44. But I think when you see 44 by 44, it's a lot easier to visualize, oh, that's going to be easier to use for everyone. And I had a quick example of that with Marie Claire. Anyone here work for Marie Claire? Let's just put that up there, just in case. All right. So this was their email sign-up form, stay in the know, and basically these checkboxes are definitely less than, they're actually smaller than 24 by 24. So if you inspect the code and go to computed, they're actually 13 pixel, sorry, it's small, but it's 13 pixels by 13 pixels. So it would fail. But because they're separated with enough spacing, they technically comply. But I like this as a simple example. If they were just meeting the accessibility standard of 44, I don't know, when I change this to be 44, and then just picture having that actually be the way that I sign up. I mean, designers, you might argue with me, but I'm it just seems easier to use. It's just already much more deterministic that I'm doing this and I'm making this selection. And when it's so tiny, it's yes, only the most dexterous person that's really paying attention even knows what they're signing up for, which maybe is the intent of this design. But I do think that when you see visually a increased 44 by 44, I would be go for that for AAA and improve. All right, the next one, we've got two more. Consistent help. This is also one that's a little weak, but the idea is that you should have a way to access help in a consistent location in the same relative order on every page of your website. So on my company site, we have a help and contact us after our About tab. It's always in the header, so it's the link at the top of the page. On gov.uk, they put it down in the footer, so they always have help as the first item in the footer. And the violation to this criterion would be when you have a different reference or a different order to the same site for help and support. So, sorry, Zipcar, but I pulled up Zipcar. On their homepage, or actually on the support page, it's the contact us link comes after search, then it's contact us, then it's sign in. But on the homepage, it's help, then sign in, then join. So this is what this is about. It's like you can't change the order, the relative ordering of where help is. And so this does not require you to have help, but it says if you do have help, it always needs to stay in a consistent spot, and you can't rearrange the order. Redundant entry. So this one's also, I think, pretty hard to fail. But again, I think it's interesting. It's probably going to apply to people working on like government forms or anywhere where you're collecting a lot of information. This is actually a tax site, file local. My street address that I'm using for my company is saved inside my sort of account. And when I go to select a drop down, I'm able to select my address and not have to type it in another time. And this is really like a difficult requirement. It's really about, it's actually would have been okay for this site to make me type it in once, but you can't make someone type it in twice. And I think maybe the most difficult part of this requirement is it does apply across third-party sites. So I think that's going to be something interesting when WCAG 2.2 starts getting looked at. I mean, sending your information to PayPal or Venmo or Square. This is basically saying, like, if your website stored the address or the name or the shipping, that information needs to be shipped to the third party. Someone should not have to enter it again a second time. And so that's the idea of the redundant entry. But what's interesting is there's no requirement to store it between sessions. So it's only about completing a single task end to end. It's not about, you could log out and come back and have all that information saved. And last, accessible authentication. This is it Twitch or Discord? I think it's Twitch. Twitch, okay. I knew. All right, so this is a Twitch UI, and this one is really about, this one also got a little bit reduced as they published the guideline, but now I think the two-factor authentication is really what this is about. You have 6 input fields here to put in your 2FA code. This requirement is basically saying I should be able to cut and paste my 2FA into this field. I should not have to like click once into field 1, type 2, click into field 2, type C. And so it's basically, if you don't support cut and paste for 2FA, that's a straightforward violation of the AA. And the other item that's more AAA, which is again what I wish had been AA, it's this idea of like having a magic link to sign into your account. So for someone with cognitive disability, remembering the password, finding the password, it's all very difficult. So the idea of the magic link is if you can sign into your email, like this is on my Equal Entry website, my knowledge base, you just put in your email address and then they'll send a link to your email and then you click that link and now you're logged in. So the idea is to remove the cognitive task of remembering a password or remembering a username. So you do have to remember your email address, but you don't have to remember your password. But again, that's AAA to actually do this magic link. And AA is going to be making sure that cut and paste can work in the password field and the 2FA field. And then if you're using something like 1Password or LastPass, that you can actually save the password. And then lastly, like I think what I wanted to say here for the whole presentation is that I guess participating in the standards, while it's a lot of work to participate in the standards, it's very important. As you see, like pretty much whatever went into WCAG 2.2 is going to be what legally someone has to do. And so if things are AAA or if things aren't really pushing accessibility forward, people aren't going to have to do it. So I think I wanted to have this presentation to just kind of educate you that most of the legal cases, they always refer back to WCAG. So if we don't participate in the creation of WCAG, or we don't make WCAG have stronger guidelines, it's going to be hard to enforce technology to actually make a change or a difference. So just so you know, anyone can participate in the consortium. I mean, there's a way to work with the W3C, but they have invited experts if it's something you're interested in. I would say that that's a great way to influence accessibility for the future. And I want to say thank you to Meryl Evans, Aaron Deupik, Ken Nakata, and Amanda Narumi. They all worked with me on making the Accessibility Insights podcast that I mentioned. And so all the different cases that I mentioned in today's presentation, there's blog posts, and there's a lot more. We've had like 15 articles now about different legal cases that are happening in the US, and we look at both the legal side and the technology side. So thank you to all of them. And now Q&A. Thank you.
Hey, Thomas. We good? Yeah. So I'm curious if you find in your work that there are ever sort of sticky conflicts between what is best for accessibility and what is best for privacy. One of the things that jumped out to me was the redundant entry problem. Like if the user did not explicitly grant my permission to send their address over to a third party, how do we get around how those things interact?
Yes, I think that's, I mean, thank you for that question. I pretty much had the same read, that I get the feeling that the people writing that into the requirement, there is a mention of that, like, hey, respect privacy and security, but the real specific detail is like, that's actually very difficult to do, and without it being actually follow this step, or here's how you do it, I think it's way too vague. So I do think that's a risk of that, and saying that that stuff's going to go to a third party, I think that is problematic, because how do you ensure, like you said, that it's secured and private? That's going to be a problem for a lot of companies. Unless the third party absolves you of that, it's going to be difficult.
I'm wondering, I haven't looked at the success techniques for that particular criterion yet. Have they touched on that, or did you dig into the techniques?
They definitely don't have
one?
it at that level of detail. And
Okay.
I just thought it was interesting that they mentioned the third party maintaining it.
Right.
Because there's no technique like showing how you do that.
Right. Okay.
There should be, though.
Yeah, just following up on that for the deep link into authentication, I'm pretty sure that directly goes against a different law. So just in your experience, like, how often do these maybe get canceled out?
Yeah, and I mean, I'll be honest, like, I don't know a lot about the process of 2.2 getting developed, but yeah, I think that shows up to me as like a big problem. It just seems like an obvious conflict, and I don't think that has, historically, I don't feel like I've felt that, but that feels like a conflict where it's like, if you're needing to comply with other regulations, this is going to cause a problem. But yeah.
Thomas, I'm going to take a question from the stream. Someone remarked that 6 months regarding the OCR litigation, that 6 months seemed like a very rapid time frame for remediation. It's sort of an embellishment, my embellishment on the question, but are there, in those situations where someone is making progress, do they get like an extension on that 6 months? Because I kind of agree with that statement that 6 months is, depending on the scope, is fast.
Yes. I think, I mean, I don't know, because I haven't worked specifically on the OCR case, but it was more my observation that whatever was happening, I would expect there to be progress. And that was my critique of it, was just that if that's what you signed and agreed to, and that's what's published, then I expect that it's done. But yeah, I think that should be, I think that is part of the process. Like, there is that idea that it's incremental improvement. And maybe this is also a soapbox, but I think that a lot of the agreements, it actually says like every single web page AA compliant. For those of us working text, like, that's really not realistic as far as doing every page, when if your home page doesn't do it, why did you sign every page is going to do it? And like, I'm sort of trying to be like, if I can't see your home page complying, why are you also agreeing that every other page is it's complying. You're not doing it. So I guess that's really, I think the crux is people sign it, they just say sure, but they're not actually doing the work. And so I guess that's the question, like how do we get people to do more of the work? And
some context for that. Usually if there's a designated time period that someone has to comply with something, the timeline depends on the size of the offender. So if it's a massive multinational, like global company, yeah, they have 6 months because they should be able to pour resources into doing it. A teeny tiny like startup might have 2 years.
Right. Yeah, and I want to be clear too, like I don't know if it was 6 months to remediate that, or if it's 6 months for, there's basically in these legal agreements, all of that's like spelled out to the T. So we can all read it, but it's like basically, my opinion is if you sign that and agree to it, someone should be checking back. Whatever you agreed to, did you do it? And to the point, it's like if you didn't, what happens after you didn't? Like how do you enforce that?
Thanks. So my question is, it's in a slightly different direction. You talked at the beginning about AI and how a company used AI and then they were getting sued. Looking at the AI space, there are so many use cases and applications that people are thinking about using AI for different ways to interact with customers, for no-code apps. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about which use cases and applications you think are going to be on the right for litigation regarding AI.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely all for using AI to like speed up the process and or make things more accessible. I think for maybe the canonical example is the alt text on an image. There's never been an AI really interpreting the image in the context of the web page, understanding the context, and then writing it in a way that is as good as a human. I just haven't seen it. But on the flip, I think this is something that Joe Devon, who spoke a few months ago at our meetup, I do think it's interesting to picture if you had a really long description of an image, some user might want this type of description, and a different user might want this description. I think that's where it could be really cool for the AI to be like, well, there is a great validated description. Maybe we've always been trained historically to be like, you only write 150 characters. A lot of times it's not enough for an image. So I think that's something cool to be like, well, with AI, one user's preference could be, I want a really long description. Another user's preference is like summarize it down. So I think that one's interesting, but I do think that relying still right now on just the AI, describe the image and push it out, that's going to be risky and like unlikely to be accurate in a broad use case. But I mean, like I said, someone demo it to me, show me that it works, and then I'll sing its praises, but I just haven't seen that yet. Yeah.
Any other questions in the room? Yes, 1 second, Joey.
I forget what the term was that you used about when they're filling out forms and it retains the data. Does that not conflict with the GDPR?
Yeah, I think that's what we were talking about. Like, I think it's very problematic that maintaining that data it seems to conflict with GPDR or like other requirements. So I think that's really maybe something I'd like to take as a follow-up here to the folks at the W3C, just to be like, well, how have you handled that? And especially with someone that has to comply with both, it's like there should be a demo or an example of like how to do that correctly, especially knowing that GPDR is probably the most famous one. It's like that would be where I would start if I was going to build a demo. It's like, how do I do this with comply with redundant entry and comply with GPDR? And I don't know the answer to that.
As you were kind of doing your analysis to put this talk together, I'm wondering if you got a read on where the trend line is heading for inclusion of native mobile experiences, non-web experiences in the legal landscape, as kind of most of the cases that I've seen are targeted at the web and then may have and also native mobile.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you're seeing anything that shows a trend line towards native mobile taking more of a place in the spotlight as an enforced property.
Yeah, I do think that mobile, I mean, it does have a place in the spotlight in the EU legislation, like EN 301549, also a great name. That legislation has more of an understanding that if you call something web, content accessibility guidelines is confusing if you're talking about documents or mobile apps. So they specifically changed the language of some of the criterion to speak to that. On the flip, you know, for someone that's like a consultant in this, for me, I'm like, well, I can take the logical leap to do this, but I think that's the argument, is that that's why Europe did something different. They were like, well, it's very confusing to talk about a set of web pages if you're talking about a native mobile app. So that's how it was done in EU, and then the US did not do that right now. So it's more like you have to make that logical leap.
Hi, this is a bit of a silly one, but the screen reader voice, I know with Gen AI, you know, very prevalent at the moment. I mean, hearing that screen reader voice, the tone, it's very robotic, and I mean, is that going to be the standard? Is that going to change? I know it differs between, but I mean, if I was somebody with a disability and I had to hear that kind of nonstop for like, you know, hours on end, it'd get me to a pretty deep mental state.
Yeah, okay, great question, and I guess 3 comments on that. Like, number one, the robotic voice, like one of the things that's interesting about the robotic voice is that most people who are using the screen reader are listening to it really sped up. Not everyone, but a lot of people are listening at a really high speed. And that was something, this is like now 20 years ago, but Microsoft thought they were doing something good by making the voice sound more human sounding. But then when you sped it up, it was actually harder to hear the voice. So the like angular, like robotic voice sped up was actually easier to hear for some people. So that's one. 2, I think there's a new feature in iOS that I just set up. You can actually put your voice into, you can record like 150 phrases and then get a synthesized voice of your voice. You can use that as someone that might be nonverbal or like is losing your voice. You can use that as a conversational point, but that's something that's not built in the screen reader, but it's kind of interesting to think like, well, what if you could have it be your voice as the screen reader, or maybe your friend's voice or someone that you like as the voice. That's interesting. Yeah, probably not. But I think that's definitely like people's preferences of the voice is, there's a lot of different voices, but I do agree that in my legal work, when I was like having to present to the judge and I'm trying to show this is working good versus this is working bad, the robotic voice, even when it's working good, it's kind of hard to explain this is good. And I think that's something that I really do feel that challenge. Like there's still tons of space for innovation because, yeah, I do think the default people are like, that's really annoying to hear that much speech. So there's an opportunity to improve.
Yeah, I think of that like writing a book or like typesetting a book. You wouldn't necessarily typeset it in like a display font. So like using something that you might use for a poster, you'd write it in a generic font like Times New Roman. I don't know. The robotic voice is the Times New Roman of voices. So like it's just much more legible at faster speeds. Whereas for something like what you described, Thomas, maybe you can change the voices. But the default in VoiceOver, and like there are a couple other defaults in JAWS and NVDA that are just very popular because they're very legible, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. So just on that.
as a practitioner, on a technical note, is it possible to change the voices programmatically as you go through the website? You will have like a hero voice, or like a Times Roman voice.
So the question, can you like CSS, for example, like a CSS for voices? There is a standard for CSS to set voice intonation and other qualities. I don't think it's very well implemented or supported, if at all, in major browsers. And it's also like you're messing with the end user's preferences. It's like changing their prescription on their glasses versus changing like the color in the display.
Gotcha, but I'm talking more about like a bold font versus, like if, for example, when you're on the subway, there is like a gender announcement, depending on, I guess, what feeling you want on the for the passengers to have.
Yeah. So the example there would be emphasis or emphasis or strong tag, for example. I don't. I'm okay here. It's fine. Nothing on that screen. Steve Faulkner wrote an article about this recently, where it's like technically supported, but not very or it's technically specified, but not well supported that it actually makes any change to the intonations. But in theory, that should work. And that is like within the scope of how assistive technologies work. I couldn't tell you like the support matrix of that, but conceptually it makes sense to me. And sorry, Thomas, for hijacking your.
Oh my God.
Thanks. The question is about legal framework. Could you maybe elaborate what kind of complaints actually being filed? What legal framework enables people to complain about what exactly? Is there like a law that says that, let's say, all businesses that are represented online should comply with W3C? What is that enables people?
Yeah, I mean, and not a lawyer, disclaimer. But, yeah, I mean, the Americans with Disabilities Act is like this broad civil rights act, and the way that our legal system works is always, the interpretation in the court systems and the judges' rulings actually make the law stronger. So that's why the Americans with Disabilities Act, it was more used about physical access and thinking about ramps and wheelchair access, elevators, this type of thing. But as commerce and the world moved into the digital realm, that's really where it's still not there is no like absolute black and white definition from the government. That's why it's been such argued in courts that all the ones that have gone to court, I mean, there's been different rulings, but like the Winn-Dixie case that I worked on, the original ruling was WCAG does fall under the ADA, and it's under the idea of like, it's a public good and service, and the way that you access the public good and service is through the website. So if that's not meeting WCAG, that's how you say it doesn't meet accessibility. But that is really kind of the crux of it. Like the ADA doesn't have anything about what you actually have to do for digital technology. All the rulings and all the judges' decisions have been, well, you need to do WCAG AA. And so that's why we were kind of in the situation that's sort of when another judge is evaluating the case, they look at the precedent and it's like, well, that's what's happened before. But a lot of people are like, well, they want the Department of Justice to make a ruling like, this is what you have to do, this is what you should do. That still has not happened. So it's kind of always just open to the court system right now.
So does that mean, hi guys, sorry to be so fashionable. I missed some of the questions, and obviously I heard there was a picture of us, so I really feel bad about that. But a couple things. One is I'm curious then, do you think the victories have been mostly based in the discrimination law rather than maybe what's technically defined with website accessibility? And then also I was curious, I know we've talked about the difference between Japan and here, and I think it's you may have already discussed that in your presentation, so forgive me if I'm asking you to repeat, but I think it would be interesting to kind of take an international perspective and hear that from you. And one last thing is, you know, talking about voices for a second, I'm reminded of Gus. Remember Gus from our the AT&T Connectability Challenge? One of the other people that was an exemplar for the challenge, he's blind, and I am very auditory and very sensitive to what voices I listen to on audiobooks and things like that. And I actually learned from him. He's like, I do not care. I care about speed. I need to know what's happening. Like, so he actually wanted the more robotic, the faster, the better, because he did not care about the experience. He wanted the information. So anyway, I don't know if that's relevant for, I just wanted to share that because I found that it changed how I saw accessibility. So that's a lot, but love you.
My gosh, that's a lot. But
Yes. Whatever you want.
I think the first point is that, I mean, the legislation is like really all across the board. I do think always, in my mind, and why I guess I got involved in the legislation, I do think it produces change, and I'm always like, I want change. So the problem though is that, does the change stay? And like, it's different when you're talking about building a physical building, right? Like, once you put in the elevator and the ramp, it's kind of there. But in tech, it's literally like you can have all this change, and then the next day it's like a different vendor builds the site or builds the app. It's like completely goes away. That's so unique to our work, and I think that's one of the things that why I was showing the Florida example. But there's a lot of those examples where, yes, they probably did make the change when they had the lawsuit, but are they keeping it up? Are they like putting it into their processes so they don't go backwards? Like when Dixie, that was nice to see, like they have the prices being announced. They didn't go backwards on that. But there's another case which I didn't talk about, but Sweet Green. I love getting Sweet Green salads. They were sued like maybe like 5 years ago. And then they also got sued really recently, like last year. And I have a blog post on this too, but part of me was like, the new lawsuit, I'm really questioning, is that really a barrier? Because I actually think Sweet Green has, I don't know what the first site version was like, but I feel like they've made it much more accessible. And when I was reading the complaint, it's like I can't get the information on the ingredients of the salad and all of this. And I went on with the screen reader and read through all of the information. I'm like, I can get it. So that becomes this other problem too, where you're like, is it just low-hanging fruit? Like, is it really a barrier? And I think that's always what my point is. Like, I think when it is a real barrier, there should be a lawsuit. But a lot of the cases, and we mentioned at the top, there's like 5,000, 4,000 something cases. Not all of those cases are really that impactful. And so we have some other examples too of like very small businesses being sued. And it's just harder to connect into the barrier of like buying a t-shirt versus like being able to have your mobile ID in Oklahoma, or like being able to purchase glasses as a person with a vision disability. I think all of that's still like very open though. And right now you can sue people, just, you're not meeting WCAG, people do lawsuits, they scan the site and then they just sue them. So. And the second one, Japan and other countries. I mean, again, I think I lived in Japan for like 4 years, and my takeaway there is just the American legal system is really kind of the hero of the disability rights movement in the US, because you actually have a mechanism to be like, well, instead of just saying you're going to do it, like now we have a way to do that. I mean, it's actually something, it's hard to always feel proud being an American, but I think that was something where I'm like, no, we actually have like a system where for civil rights, if you don't follow it, there is a repercussion. And I actually think in most other countries, it's more, you should do it, do the right thing. And more of the companies that end up doing it, like in Japan, they're doing business in the US, and they're like, oh wait, we have to do it because we're also selling to the US. So I look at that as like a positive of the US legal system pushing this.
Question from the stream about progress made around these standards. So especially around EdTech, do you see there being progress with the output of EdTech companies and the technology and applications they're delivering?
Yeah, that was another topic we had too is there's a big discussion point around like how to produce educational software or educational content, what has to be accessible, and there was a lot of everything has to be, but then here's all the exceptions. And one of the exceptions that Ken and I disagreed with was basically that someone would have to notify the professor that they're taking the class before it would be made accessible. And we were discussing that, at least in our experience, a lot of times going to university, you take classes and you drop them like the first week or second week. So like, how are you going to notify the professor, hey, I'm taking this class, like ahead of time? And that's one of the like exceptions that was being discussed that we, I guess, argued with. And I do think it's improving, but I mean, I think in general, like, I think it's still so easy to like pull up almost any site and find accessibility barriers. So, you know, just still on this journey together.
Thomas, I'm going to pause this here because we're actually at time with our human captioner. Thank you, human captioner, for doing such a great job. Kimberly is probably exhausted and she's over time. So I did want to close by saying thank you again to Thomas. Thank you. I wanted to highlight again AKQA's generosity in hosting us tonight. I didn't really get to talk about them much, but they're an innovative full-service digital and marketing solutions company that works with a lot of really big brands and can work with you. So if you have questions, talk to Keith in the back. Anyone along that bench. Thank you again to our sponsors and to everyone on the stream. Come join us next week on Tuesday. It's a rapid fire for this meetup. Jessie Beach works at Facebook and by association Meta, and she developed some of the seminal work in test automation for accessibility with her development of Quail.js and more recently JSX A11y, ESLint JSX A11y. And she's a superstar. So please, if you care anything about accessibility testing and you want to learn, come to this event or join us on the live stream. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you. And we have like a couple minutes at a minimum. I will let people know when it's time to leave.